So today we're going to talk about public organizations and public opinion, and the influence of public opinion, and the paradoxes of public opinion. So, public organizations need support from mass publics, and what I mean by that is broad, diffuse populations. Uh, there are two types of public opinion that are particularly important: attitudes toward the public in general, and attitudes toward specific agencies and policies. And these vary widely depending on what the agency or policies deal with. So, for a little bit of historical context, uh, President Carter used public opinion to promote civil service reform, attempting to motivate federal workers and fire lazy ones. Following the Nixon administration, we became very uh, skeptical of government power. There was a time when government was more respected, trust in government was higher. But following Watergate, since then we've had much lower levels of trust in government, and so President Carter recognized that the public viewed federal workers as inefficient and lazy, and tried to do civil service reform that would motivate federal workers. President Reagan had a much more negative attitude towards civil service reform and the federal bureaucracy, uh, uh, arguing that government needed to get out of the way. So Reagan aggressively attacked bureaucracy, cutting agency budgets and staffing, and sought to diminish the authority of career administrators, federal career administrators. Reforms were designed in large part to show the public that the president could change an inefficient bureaucracy, that that things didn't need to be this way, that government didn't need to be efficient, that government could run more like a business, although we tend to overestimate how efficient businesses run too, and we tend to underestimate how much bureaucracy businesses use themselves. But anyway, this was a public opinion issue, that the public had a view of bureaucracy that needed to be changed. So the reforms did hurt. These reforms did hurt morale with the federal government employees. That federal employees starting in the 90s began to say that in surveys that they would no longer recommend people go into federal public service. And some of these attitudes trickle down to how states deal with state employees and the bureaucracy too. So state level reforms happened because of public opinion toward inefficient bureaucracy too. So in the 1990s, Georgia and Florida governors proposed changes to the merit system that would get rid of a lot of merit protections and make it easier for state employees to be fired, and make it easier to tie pay raises more closely to performance. But there are definitely paradoxes in public opinion toward the bureaucracy. Surveys show that the public wants reduced taxes. We want to pay less in taxes. But the same surveys also show that the public doesn't want massive cuts or just reduced spending in general to most types of public services. So we want to pay less and get more, which I guess is a normal human behavior. But we want lower taxes, but we don't want cuts in services. When asked in general, the public doesn't like federal bureaucracies. The public doesn't like federal agencies. The public doesn't like Congress. It's very similar. The public opinion dynamic here is very similar to that of support for Congress. Every now and then, the news media will report that things like going to the dentist are more popular, getting a root canal done are more popular than Congress. And yet we keep re-electing the same members of Congress over and over and over. It's because we like our member of Congress, we just don't like Congress as an institution. So the same thing happens with federal bureaucracies. We say we don't like the federal bureaucracy. We say we don't like federal agencies. But then when we're asked about a specific experience at an agency, we tend to rate performance much higher. We tend to give more favorable responses. So if you ask in a survey, how much do you like going to the Department of Driver Services or the DMV in some states? People will say, it's awful. I hate my experience there. It's terribly inefficient. Everything's awful. But you're more likely to get a more positive response if you survey people after they have an experience there where they're updating their driver's license. They're more likely to say, no, this was a good experience. I didn't have any problems today. I liked the service I got, and this was fine. So we don't like the bureaucracy as a whole, and we don't like agencies in general, but our specific experiences don't always match those feelings toward bureaucracy. And so because of these paradoxes, our public administrators are caught in a situation where they have to decide, do we reform based on general attitudes toward the bureaucracy? Can we change those attitudes toward bureaucracy? What about instances where the bureaucracy is actually doing a pretty good job when you talk to people who are dealing with it, but in general we just don't like the agency as a whole? How much do we pay attention to public opinion when it comes to making these decisions when you're getting kind of mixed signals? Support for agencies is different too, because our agencies, support for specific agencies is different because our agencies deal with very different things. So there's high levels of support for things like the Department of Defense and for your local police departments and your local fire departments because of people's importance that they put on public safety. But then there's low levels of support for agencies that deal with social programs and things like welfare payments. So it really depends on what the agency is doing. That's something that presidents and governors and other elected officials and people actually working in the bureaucracy have to consider. Is there anything you can do to make the IRS popular? And to make even though the work of the IRS is very important, can you ever expect that public opinion is going to be favorable toward the IRS? Maybe not. And then what changes what reforms can you make with how they operate to make the public happy, if anything? So those are some things to consider about public opinion and public organizations. Thank you.